The obsidian walls of the conclave ascendant drank the light, reflecting nothing back but a deeper, more profound darkness. Here, at the apex of the Cathar Imperium, silence was a currency of power, and Grand Marshal Kalen possessed more of it than any other. He stood before the great holographic star map, a swirling nebula of conquered systems and tributary worlds, his four powerful arms clasped behind his armored carapace. The air, recycled and sterile, tasted of ozone and simmering fear, a scent Kalen had come to associate with political maneuvering rather than genuine threat. But tonight, the two were indistinguishable. The map was dominated by the crimson stain of their Imperium, a testament to generations of conquest, yet all eyes, all thoughts were fixed on a single, insignificant point of light flickering erratically at its fringe. Sector 734, the system that housed Bloodforge. The silence was finally broken by a voice like grinding stones, heavy with ambition and disdain. "It is a phantom," High Scion Thrax declared, his own polished carapace gleaming under the chamber's ethereal glow. "A ghost story told by watchstanders on long, dark cycles. For generations, this tale of a mythical ship has persisted. A flicker on a sensor array, a distorted energy reading, a communications blackout on a remote patrol. These are equipment malfunctions, stellar phenomena, the predictable decay of technology at the edge of our glorious dominion. To bring this folklore before the conclave is a waste of vital time. The outer rim requires pacification, not ghost hunting." Kalen did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the anomaly. It was more than a flicker. It was a pattern, a breath in the void that was too rhythmic to be natural, too faint to be a genuine warship. It was an impossibility that had been logged with increasing frequency over the past cycles, always near Bloodforge, the jewel of their industrial might, the planet-sized foundry that armed their legions. Bloodforge, which had once been known by another name. A soft, primitive name from a species they had erased from that system with contemptuous ease. "Folklore does not disrupt subspace relays across an entire sector." Kalen's voice was a low baritone, a stark contrast to Thrax's grating rasp. It carried the weight of countless campaigns, the weariness of a warrior who had seen too many impossible things become true. "It does not leave behind residual chronoton eddies that our finest science cadres cannot explain. It does not match with perfect temporal alignment the disappearance of 3 separate long-range scout vessels over the past standard year. The crews did not send distress signals. Their logs were not wiped. They simply ceased to be." A murmur rippled through the assembled scions and marshals. They were the architects of an empire built on overwhelming force, on the brutal logic of kinetic strikes and planetary bombardment. Their fleets were tides of iron and fire, their strategies were hammers, and every problem was a nail. The idea of an enemy that was not a nail, that was instead a whisper, a shadow, was anathema to their very being. It stirred a primal discomfort, a fear not of defeat, but of irrelevance. The species that once inhabited that system, the humans, Thrax spat the word as if it were a contaminant. They were primitives. They fought us with chemical propellants and magnetic slugs. They built cities of glass and steel that shattered under our orbital lances. We ground their civilization to dust, and from that dust we forged the instruments of our continued ascent. Bloodforge is our testament to the principle of might. The notion that a remnant of that broken people could haunt us is an insult to the memory of our victory." Kalen finally turned, his multifaceted eyes focusing on Thrax. The younger scion flinched almost imperceptibly. Kalen's gaze held the gravity of collapsed stars. "It is not their power I question, High Scion. It is their nature. I have reviewed the archival records from that campaign. I have read the final transmissions from their colony." He paused, letting the chamber's oppressive silence return, letting it amplify his next words. "They did not plead for mercy. They did not scream in terror. Their final broadcast from the colony they called Veridia was a single, repeating string of mathematical constants, interwoven with a sequence our linguists have never been able to decipher. It was not a surrender. It was not a curse. It felt like a calculation." "A calculation for what, Grand Marshal?" Thrax sneered. "How to die with dignity, a pointless exercise." "Perhaps," Kalen conceded, his voice dropping even lower, drawing the entire conclave into its orbit. "Or perhaps it was a calculation for something else, a variable they were solving, a promise being encoded into the fabric of spacetime itself. We prided ourselves on breaking their bodies and their cities. We never considered that our true strength might lie elsewhere. We measured them by their warships and their armor, and we found them wanting. We never thought to measure them by their silence." The holographic map suddenly pulsed, a soft chime echoing through the vast chamber. Every eye snapped towards it. The flickering anomaly near Bloodforge had stabilized. It was no longer a ghost, a whisper on the edge of sensor acuity. It was a single, solid point of light. It emitted no energy signature Cathar instruments could recognize, no heat, no radiation, no drive plume. It was a perfect, absolute void in the shape of a vessel, a hole in the universe that had drifted into their most vital system. "Alert the Bloodforge defense fleet," Kalen commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion but a chilling, profound certainty. "Full defensive posture, hail the vessel, demand identification." Thrax scoffed, recovering his bravado. "A single, powerless ship, our fleet there could glass a continent in minutes. Let them hail it. Let us see what pathetic remnant has come crawling from the dark. Then we will erase it as we erased its ancestors." But Kalen was not listening. He was staring at the impossible shape on the map, a shape that did not reflect light or energy but seemed to consume it. He was remembering the final, incomprehensible transmission from Veridia, the cold, clear sequence of numbers and symbols. He had dismissed it then as the last act of a dying, irrational species. Now a dreadful clarity settled upon him. It had not been a message of despair. It was the closing of a ledger. It was the quiet, methodical turning of a key in a lock. The Cathar had built an empire on a foundation of glorious, thunderous violence. They had never considered an enemy whose greatest weapon might be patience. The fleet orbiting Bloodforge was a spectacle of Cathar might. A swarm of jagged, brutalist warships, their hulls etched with the glories of past conquests, formed a layered defense around the planet Foundry. Bloodforge itself was a terrifying sight, a world stripped of all life and remade into a singular, purpose-driven engine of war. Its continents were vast, open-pit mines and sprawling manufactories that glowed with infernal light, spewing smoke and fire into a perpetually choked sky. A network of orbital defense platforms, each the size of a small city, studded the space around it, their immense kinetic cannons aimed out into the silent void. This was the heart of the Imperium's power, a symbol of its unbreakable will. Aboard the fleet's flagship, the Iron Hammer, Admiral Valerius watched his command console with a mixture of irritation and grim focus. The intruder was a sliver of nothingness on his main tactical display, a ghost that refused to conform to any known vessel classification. It was small, smaller than a Cathar frigate, and utterly unresponsive. "Hailing frequencies remain open, Admiral," a communications officer reported, his voice tight. "No response on any band, no transponder, no IFF signal. It does not appear to possess a communications array we can detect." "Is it even a vessel?" Valerius grumbled, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Or is it some new form of stellar debris?" "Debris does not move with such deliberate intent, Admiral," the tactical officer countered, his own eyes wide with a touch of awe. "And it does not bend light. Our long-range optical sensors are being distorted around its hull. It's as if spacetime itself is warped in its immediate vicinity." Valerius stared at the magnified image. It was a ship, undeniably so, but unlike any he had ever seen. It had no visible engines, no weapon emplacements, no viewports. It was a seamless, featureless shape of absolute black, a cutting edge of obsidian adrift in the cosmos. It absorbed all sensor scans, all light, giving back nothing. It was the physical embodiment of silence. "Orders from the Conclave, Admiral," the communications officer announced, his voice suddenly hushed. "Grand Marshal Kalen authorizes a warning shot." Valerius felt a surge of relief. Finally action, a language the Cathar understood. "Target the vessel, fire a single plasma bolt 50 kilometers off its bow. Let us see if this ghost can feel heat." The command was executed with brutal efficiency. A forward battery on the Iron Hammer charged, an orb of incandescent energy growing at its maw, and then unleashed a blindingly bright spear of plasma. The bolt tore through the void, a silent proclamation of Cathar power. It streaked towards the dark ship, destined to detonate in a brilliant, harmless display of force. But it never arrived. A collective gasp went through the bridge of the Iron Hammer. The plasma bolt, a projectile of pure, concentrated energy, did not impact a shield. It did not detonate. As it approached the silent vessel, it seemed to unravel. The incandescent spear of light frayed at the edges, its coherence dissolving as if the physical laws holding it together simply ceasing to apply. It dissipated into a harmless cloud of exotic particles that were swiftly swallowed by the blackness of the ship's hull. There was a stunned silence on the bridge. Valerius stared, his 4 eyes blinking in disbelief. That was not a shield. Shields blocked, they absorbed, they flared with energy. This was something else entirely. This was erasure. "Report," Valerius roared, his composure cracking. "What was that? What technology is capable of deconstructing a plasma bolt in transit?" The tactical officer was pale, his carapace seeming to shrink. I have no data, Admiral. There was no energy discharge from the target, no defensive field detected. The bolt's own energy signature simply ceased to exist. It was nullified at a quantum level. From the conclave chamber, millions of light-years away, the assembled leaders of the Imperium watched the same feed. High Scion Thrax's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a stony, furious disbelief. Even he could not dismiss this. This was not a malfunction. This was a demonstration. "Fire again," Thrax hissed, his voice a low growl of pure aggression. "A full salvo. Target the vessel directly. Whatever trick this is, it cannot withstand the concentrated fire of a battle group." Kalen held up a hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless carried the absolute weight of his authority. "No." "Grand Marshal, this is an act of defiance in our most vital system," Thrax protested. "We must crush it." "You are a fool, Thrax," Kalen said, his voice flat and cold. "You see a nail, so you swing your hammer. You do not see that the nail is not made of iron, but of something that will shatter your hammer and your arm along with it. That was not a defense. That was a statement. It was a message clearer than any words. Your power is irrelevant here." As if on cue, a new icon appeared on the tactical displays both in the conclave and on the bridge of the iron hammer. The silent vessel was emitting a signal. It was not a broad-spectrum hail, but a tight, focused beam aimed directly at the Cathar flagship and impossibly at the conclave chamber itself, as if it knew exactly where the heart of the Imperium was listening. "We are receiving a communication," the officer on the iron hammer announced, his voice trembling. "Audio only, it is in perfect, unaccented Catharic." A voice filled the sterile air of the conclave and the bridge of the warship. It was a calm, female voice, measured and devoid of any discernible emotion. It held no anger, no fear, no triumph. It was the voice of a scientist reading a data log or a judge delivering a final, immutable verdict. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the United Nations ship Silentium." The name sent a tremor of recognition through the chamber. Silentium, the mythical ship, the ghost, it was real. "We are here on behalf of the people of Veridia," the voice continued, as calm and clear as the void itself. "Your designation for this system is Bloodford. We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to declare war. War is a conversation between equals, and we no longer consider you our equals. We are here to deliver a sentence." Admiral Valerius, on his bridge, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the life support. The sheer, unadulterated confidence in that voice was more terrifying than any weapon. He looked at the fleet surrounding him, a bastion of power that had crushed civilizations, and for the first time in his long career it felt fragile. In the conclave, Thrax was incandescent with rage. "Sentence! They dare speak of a sentence! They are a single, insignificant ship. Destroy them! Admiral Valerius, I command you to open fire with the full might of your fleet." "Admiral, you will hold your fire," Kalen commanded, his voice cutting through Thrax's fury like a blade. He stepped closer to the holographic display, addressing the disembodied voice as if its speaker were standing right there in the chamber. "Captain Rostova, this is Grand Marshal Kalen of the Cathar Imperium. What is the meaning of this intrusion?" There was a pause, a beat of perfect silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then the voice of Eva Rostova returned, its placid tone unwavering. "Meaning, Grand Marshal, is a construct of perspective. From your perspective, you are the rightful conquerors of this system. You see this world as a resource, a testament to your strength. From our perspective, you are standing on a mass grave, and the foundations of your foundry are cemented with the dust of our dead. We have returned to correct your perspective." Before Kalen or anyone else could respond, the Silentium acted. It did not fire a weapon. It did not launch a missile. Instead, a wave of something emanated from its black hull. It was not energy. It was not matter. It was a distortion, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. The Cathar ships were not damaged. Their shields did not even flicker. But every sensor on every ship went blind, filled with a static that was not noise but information, a flood of incomprehensible data. And then the effect reached Bloodforge. The wave washed over the planet Foundry, silent and invisible. For a moment, nothing happened. The great forges continued to burn, the orbital platforms held their positions, the legions of Cathar workers and soldiers continued their tasks. Then, a subtle change began. A shimmer appeared in the polluted air. Ghostly images, translucent and ethereal, began to flicker into existence across the scarred landscape. On the bridge of the Iron Hammer, the main view screen, which had been showing only static, cleared. But it was not showing the real-time image of Bloodforge. It was showing something else. It was showing a world that was green. A world with blue oceans and white clouds. A world with cities made of gleaming glass that reached for a clear, sunlit sky. It was showing Veridia. "What is this?" Admiral Valerius whispered, horrified. "Some kind of psychological projection, a broadcast." "No," Captain Rostova's voice echoed gently through the bridge and the conclave. "It is not a projection. It is not a memory. We are not showing you the past. We are making the past resonate with the present. We call it a chronoton resonance field. Every atom retains a memory of its former state. We have simply given them a voice." The scene on the view screen sharpened. The ghostly images became more solid. On the surface of Bloodforge, Cathar soldiers stopped in their tracks, staring in confusion and terror. Where a moment ago there had been a slag heap, there now stood the translucent image of a park with trees and fountains. Where a weapons factory had stood, there now shimmered the outline of a university, its lecture halls filled with the spectral forms of students and teachers. And there were people. Ghostly figures of humans walked the phantom streets, families having picnics in ethereal parks, children laughing as they chased each other through the spectral walls of Cathar barracks, scientists in shimmering laboratories debating equations on translucent screens. They did not interact with the Cathar. They were echoes, replaying the last peaceful days of their lives, completely unaware of the horrified soldiers standing in their midst. "Your Imperium is built on the erasure of history," Rostova's voice explained, its calm now seeming utterly monstrous. "You conquer, you destroy, and you build upon the ashes, declaring a new truth. You believe that what is forgotten ceases to exist. That is the foundational lie of every tyrant. We are here to teach you that nothing is ever truly forgotten. You did not conquer a planet. You murdered a world, and now you will bear witness." The idyllic scenes began to change. The sky on the view screen darkened. The ghostly images of the Cathar invasion fleet appeared in the phantom sky. The translucent human figures looked up, their spectral faces turning from peace to alarm, then to terror. The Cathar on the surface of Bloodforge were now forced to watch the invasion from the perspective of their victims. They saw the orbital lances strike, not as glorious beams of cleansing fire, but as silent, terrifying columns of light that vaporized parks and schools. They heard the faint, ghostly echoes of screams. They were trapped in a waking nightmare, a historical reenactment from which there was no escape. They were not observers, they were participants. The resonance field was not just visual. It carried faint sensory impressions, the smell of burning forests, the taste of dust and fear, the ground trembling under the phantom impacts. In the conclave, the Scions were frozen, their faces a mask of horror and disbelief. Thrax, the proud warrior, had sunk into his seat, his carapace dull, his eyes wide with a terror he had never known. This was not warfare. This was something far more intimate, far more violating. It was an attack not on their ships or their bodies, but on their very souls, on the bedrock of their imperial pride. Kalen stood alone, watching the unfolding spectral apocalypse. He saw a ghostly human mother shielding her child as their home dissolved into light. He saw a group of colonial militia firing their crude magnetic rifles at an unstoppable Cathar war machine, their defiance a fleeting, tragic gesture. He was not just watching it. He was feeling it. The field was resonating with his own memories of the campaign, amplifying the guilt he had buried for decades under layers of duty and honor. He remembered giving the order to fire, the cold calculus of conquest. Now he was being forced to witness the true cost of that calculation. The resonance field reached the climax of its ghostly playback. It focused on the final moments of the capital city of Veridia, the last stand, the final defiant transmission. The Cathar soldiers on the ground were now standing amidst a full-scale spectral battle, phantom explosions rocking. The very air they breathed. They saw themselves, or rather, the ghostly, Har legions of the past, storming the city, their weapons carving through the last vestiges of human resistance. "You call this planet Bloodforge?" Rostova's voice intoned, a quiet sermon over the ghostly chaos. "You named it for the blood you spilled and the weapons you forged from the ruins. You made it a symbol of your power. From this day forward, it will be a monument to your crime. Every Cathar who sets foot on this world for the rest of time will see what you saw today. They will walk through the ghosts of Veridia. They will hear the echoes of the lives you extinguished. We are not destroying your foundry, Grand Marshal. We are consecrating it. This is not annihilation. This is penance. The ghostly images began to fade, the resonance field slowly receding. The green world vanished, replaced once more by the scorched industrial hellscape of Bloodforge. But the silence that descended was different. It was not the silence of a functioning military-industrial complex. It was the silence of profound, collective shock. The foundry's fires had died down. The ceaseless churn of machinery had ceased. The legions of workers and soldiers stood motionless, staring at the empty spaces where the ghosts had been. On the bridge of the Iron Hammer, Admiral Valerius was on his knees, his head bowed. He had seen the face of a human child, a spectral girl looking up at the sky just before the orbital lance struck her school. That image would be burned into his mind forever. "The sentence is delivered," Captain Rostova's voice said, a final, quiet punctuation mark. "Your revenge was loud, Grand Marshal. Ours is silent." The single point of blackness on the tactical display, the UNS Silentium, began to fade. It did not jump to hyperspace. It did not accelerate. It simply dissolved back into the void from which it came, leaving behind a stillness more profound than any explosion. It left behind an empire whose foundational myth of righteous strength had been shattered, not by a superior weapon, but by a superior truth. The mythical ship was real, and it had not come for war. It had come for justice. And its silent revenge would echo through the Cathar Imperium for 1,000 generations. The silence in the conclave ascendant was absolute, a crushing weight that felt heavier than any defeat in battle. The great holographic map still glowed, but the crimson stain of the Imperium no longer seemed a mark of glory. It looked like a wound. High Scion Thrax was slumped in his ceremonial chair, his polished carapace seeming to have lost its luster. His aggressive certainty, the very core of his political identity, had been hollowed out, replaced by a vacant, horrified stare. The other Scions and Marshals were similarly afflicted, their rigid postures of authority gone, leaving only the hunched forms of beings who had been forced to look into an abyss and had seen their own reflection. They had built their civilization on the principle that history is written by the victors. They had never conceived of a foe who could force them to read the footnotes of the vanquished. Grand Marshal Kalen was the only one still standing, his gaze fixed on the empty space near Bloodforge where the human ship had been. He felt no rage, no desire for retribution. Those were the emotions of a simpler time, of a war fought with matter and energy. This conflict had been waged in the currency of truth and memory, and the Cathar had been proven bankrupt. The humans had not destroyed their greatest forge. They had transformed it into a tomb, a perpetual reminder of their barbarism. Every warrior trained on Bloodforge, every weapon built there, would now be tainted with the inescapable memory of Veridia. It was a strategic masterstroke of such profound psychological depth that Kalen could only feel a cold, terrifying awe. He finally turned to face the broken assembly. "Production on Bloodforge has ceased," he stated, his voice a low, resonant anchor in the sea of shock. "The garrison is unresponsive. The workers are catatonic. Admiral Valerius reports a complete breakdown of morale and discipline throughout the fleet. They have not been defeated. They have been undone." Thrax stirred, his voice a dry rasp, a shadow of its former arrogance. What do they want, the humans? What do they want from us?" "They have already taken what they came for," Kalen replied, a deep weariness in his tone. "They did not want territory. They did not want resources. They wanted us to see. They wanted us to remember. That was their price." He walked slowly towards the center of the chamber, his heavy footsteps the only sound. He held up a hand, and a communications channel opened, a tight beam aimed at the last known coordinates of the Silentium. He did not know if they were still listening, but he had to speak. The old way, the Cathar way of dominance and defiance, was dead. A new path had to be forged, and it began with a word his species had rarely used with sincerity. "Captain Rostova," he began, his voice broadcast into the void. "This is Grand Marshal Kalen. Your sentence has been received. The Imperium acknowledges the crime committed at Veridia. We acknowledge the justice of your actions today." He paused, the words feeling alien and heavy in his mouth. "On behalf of the Cathar Imperium, I offer our surrender." The word hung in the air of the conclave, an impossible utterance that signified the end of an epoch. Surrender, not to a superior fleet, but to a superior moral and technological reality. For a long moment there was only the hiss of the open channel. Kalen expected nothing. The humans had achieved their goal. They had no reason to speak to them again. Then, to his astonishment, the calm, measured voice of Eva Rostova returned, as clear as if she were in the room. "We do not accept your surrender, Grand Marshal." The response was so unexpected it sent a fresh wave of confusion through the chamber. Kalen was stunned. You do not accept? Then what is your purpose? To watch us crumble from within?" "Your internal politics are of no concern to us," the human captain replied, her tone as placid as ever. "Surrender implies a state of war. We told you this was not war. This was a verdict, and the reason for it was not simply revenge. That was a secondary objective, a field test for the technology." Kalen felt a new, colder dread begin to creep up his spine, a fear that dwarfed what he had felt watching the ghosts of Veridia. A field test? For what? There was another pause, longer this time. When Rostova spoke again, her voice carried a subtle shift, a hint of something vast and ancient, a weariness that seemed to transcend a single lifetime. "Your philosophy of conquest, Grand Marshal, is a brutal adolescent thing. It is a luxury of a young species. We know this because we once shared it. We had to evolve past it. We were forced to." The holographic map in the center of the conclave flickered. A new data stream was being fed into it, a human data stream that bypassed all Cathar security protocols with effortless grace. The map of the Imperium zoomed out, and out, and out, past the charted territories, past the regions of known rival empires, past the edges of their own galaxy. It resolved into a map of the local galactic cluster, a sea of island universes separated by unfathomable voids. 80 standard years ago, before you arrived in our system, before we had even mastered interstellar travel, our deep space radio observatories picked up a signal, Rostova explained. Her voice was no longer that of a judge, but of a scholar recounting a terrible discovery. It was not a message. It was not a language. It was the echo of a catastrophe broadcast on a wavelength that could only be generated by the physical collapse of a star. But it was patterned, rhythmic. On the map, a distant galaxy flared, then went dark. It happened in an instant, but the data stream slowed it down, showing a wave of something spreading from the galaxy's core, extinguishing every star it touched in a perfectly ordered spiral. Our scientists studied the pattern for decades. They found it was not random. It contained information. It was not a language, but something more fundamental. It was a mathematical proof, an equation. The map zoomed in on the dark, dead galaxy. Ghostly symbols and equations of a complexity that made Kalen's mind reel were overlaid on the screen. "It is a proof for the most efficient method of converting baryonic matter into energy, and then converting that energy into a state of existence that violates known laws of thermodynamics," Rostova continued. "It is not a message from someone. It is a message about something. It is the signature of a harvester, a consumer of cosmic-scale resources, something that moves from galaxy to galaxy, system by system, and methodically, silently, turns everything into fuel." A cold, absolute terror gripped Kalen. He looked at Thrax, at the other Scions. They were beginning to understand. Their glorious wars, their petty squabbles over territory, their entire concept of conquest, it was all a child's game played in a sandbox, while a tidal wave loomed over the horizon. "We called the source of the signal the silent consumer," Rostova said. "Because after the initial energy burst of consumption, there is only silence. The signal we intercepted was the last gasp of a civilization far older and more powerful than either of ours. They did not send a warning. They simply broadcast the equation, their final act of defiance, to leave behind the physics of their own extinction." The map shifted again. It highlighted a region of intergalactic space, a patch of the cosmic microwave background radiation that was wrong. It was colder than it should be. It was a shadow, a stain of absolute zero spreading slowly, imperceptibly, towards T. "Our own galactic cluster. The silentium and the chronoton resonance field were not built for you, Grand Marshal," Rostova stated, the full weight of the revelation finally landing. "Your Imperium was a tragic, violent distraction. We developed this technology not to fight ships, but to fight a predator that may not even perceive ships as a threat. We needed a way to interact with reality on a fundamental level. We needed a weapon that could attack a concept. The attack on Bloodfort. It was to see if we could impose a new truth upon a localized section of spacetime, to see if memory could be made manifest against a hostile present." Kalen stared at the creeping shadow on the map. All the pieces fell into place. The humans calm, their lack of anger, their focus on a form of justice that was not about killing but about changing reality itself. They had been preparing for a war not against an empire, but against a law of physics, against an existential threat so vast it rendered all other conflicts meaningless. Their silent revenge had been a horrifying, awe-inspiring display, but to them it was just a calibration. "The shadow is moving faster than our initial models predicted," Rostova's voice concluded, now imbued with a solemn gravity that united them in a shared, terrifying future. "It will reach the edge of our galaxy in less than 500 of your standard years. We do not know what it is, whether it is a single entity, a fleet, or a mindless, naturally occurring phenomenon. We only know its purpose, to consume, and we know that neither of our species can face it alone." The communication channel remained open, an invitation hanging in the void. Kalen looked from the shadow on the map to the faces of his fellow Cathar. The fear was still there, but it was being forged into something new. The shock was giving way to a dawning, terrible resolve. Their empire, their pride, their history of conquest, it was all meaningless now. All that mattered was what came next. He turned back to the holographic display, his voice clear and strong, no longer the leader of a broken empire, but the representative of a species that had just been awakened to a universe far larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. "Captain Rostova," Kalen said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber, "you say you did not accept our surrender, then we offer something else. We offer our ships, we offer our forges, we offer our strength. Teach us what you know, show us how to fight the silence." There was a final, long pause from the other end. Then, the voice of Eva Rostova returned, for the first time, with something that was not coldness, not judgment, but the faintest glimmer of a shared, desperate hope. "Very well, Grand Marshal, the lesson begins now." The human data stream stabilized, no longer a weapon, but a gift. Schematics, sensor logs, astronomical projections, a torrent of information began to flow into the Cathar systems. The great holographic map of the Conclave, once a symbol of imperial dominance, transformed. It became a diagram of a shared threat, a battle plan for a war that would be fought not for glory or territory, but for the continued existence of light and life against a vast, hungry, and silent darkness. The Cathar Imperium had been conquered, not by an enemy fleet, but by a truth it could no longer ignore. And in its defeat, it had found a new and terrible purpose.